When we read these huge, epic Bible stories, have you ever thought about the people just kind of lurking in the background? Well, today, we're pulling one of them right into the spotlight, Terah, who you might know as Abraham's father. His story isn't just a name in a long family tree. It's actually the secret key to understanding one of the biggest commands God ever gave.
Think about it. When God called Abraham, he didn't just say, "Hey, pack your bags, we're moving." No, the command was to leave his country, his relatives, and, this is the big one, his father's house. So why? Why such a radical clean break? What was going on that God had to completely sever that bond between a father and son to get his master plan rolling? Well, to get to the bottom of it, we have to look at Terah himself. His story is this fascinating, kind of sad tale of a journey that was started with good intentions, but a destination that was never reached. And right there, in that unfinished journey, we find the entire reason for the divine separation that literally changed history. All right, let's dig in. So, our investigation really starts with the man at the center of this whole puzzle. Because to get why God gave that command to the son, you first have to understand the father. Who exactly was this guy, Terah? And why does his story matter so much? Okay, so the book of Genesis tells us Terah is the father of 3 sons living in a place called Ur of the Chaldees. Now, Ur was a seriously impressive city for its time, super wealthy, really advanced, but spiritually, it was a total minefield, a major hub for pagan worship. And here's our very first clue. In all of Terah's 205 years, the Bible doesn't mention a single significant spiritual act. No divine promise, nothing. He's really just remembered as someone's dad. So what Genesis tells us is pretty sparse. But that silence, that lack of information, it actually speaks volumes. And it leads us right to the heart of this whole thing, Terah's secret. You see, the command for Abraham to leave his father's house wasn't just about moving to a new address. It was a deep spiritual command. So what was it about Terah's influence that God saw as a direct threat to the promise he was about to make? After Genesis, the trail on Terah kinda goes cold. But then, hundreds of years later, in the book of Joshua, a single verse just blows this entire case wide open. And there it is, plain as day. Terah was an idolater. He served other gods. Now, this isn't just some little historical detail. This is the smoking gun. This is the very heart of the separation. The man who raised the father of faith was himself spiritually tangled up in the idols of his culture. Now, here's what's so critical about this. Terah's idolatry wasn't just, a personal bad habit. It represented an entire spiritual system, a whole way of life that God could not build his holy nation on. It was a complete blockade, stopping the flow of divine purpose. Abraham had to be completely ripped out of this contaminated soil for true faith to ever have a chance to grow. Okay, so now we know what had to be left behind. But this is where the story takes a really surprising twist. Because it turns out Abraham wasn't actually the first one in the family to try to leave. I mean, this has to be one of the most overlooked verses in this whole story. Genesis 11 tells us that Terah himself packed up his family, set out from Ur, and his intended destination was Canaan, the future promised land. The whole idea of leaving didn't start with Abraham's obedience. It actually started with Terah's interrupted obedience. He started the journey, but he never finished it. The family made it as far as a city called Haran, and there, well, the momentum just died. They settled down, the journey toward the promise just sort of fell asleep. And Haran, it's so much more than just a dot on a map. It's this powerful spiritual symbol. It represents the halfway point, the almost there. It's that place where our good intentions stop just short of full obedience. See, Terah left the obvious paganism of Ur, but he settled in Haran, a place that was probably more comfortable, but still tied to the same old idolatry. He left the problem, but the problem never really left him. And it's right at this point, with Terah stuck in his comfort zone in Haran, that God steps in with one of the clearest, most direct commands in the entire Bible. And just notice how this command in Genesis 12 keeps getting more and more intense. It's like a triple pruning. First, get out of your country. Okay, that's the broad culture. Second, get out from your kindred. All right, now we're talking extended family. And finally, the most personal, most difficult cut of all. Get out from your father's house, the very source of that idolatrous inheritance. So here's the bottom line. God wasn't just calling Abraham to a new place. He was calling him to a totally new reality. The promise of starting a holy nation just couldn't survive mixed in with that old idolatrous framework. It needed a clean break, a complete abandonment of his natural family origin so that a new divine inheritance could begin. And this command just perfectly sets up this final, stark contrast between the Father and the Son. It's a choice between two completely different paths, two different ways of life.
And wow, the contrast couldn't be clearer. On one side, you've got Terah. He stands for the past, for getting stuck, for an obedience that started strong but just fizzled out. He is the human inheritance. But on the other side, you have Abraham. He represents the future, progress, and a wild, radical faith that's willing to go without even knowing the final destination. He's the beginning of the divine inheritance. One man started the journey, the other was called to finish it.
But before Abraham could really move forward, there was one last link to that old system that had to be broken. The era of Terah had to officially, finally, come to an end. The Bible just states it so simply. It's almost like a footnote at the end of a chapter. After starting the journey but settling halfway, and Terah died in Haran, the very place that symbolized his incomplete obedience. But this isn't just a sad ending to his story. Theologically, it is a massive turning point. Terah's death represents the final, decisive cut from the past. The idolatry, the half-hearted journey, the heavy weight of that old spiritual baggage, it all ends right there, buried in Haran. And this is where it all just clicks into place. Look at the timing. It's brilliant. Genesis 11 ends with verse 32. Terah dies. And what is the very next verse, the first verse of Genesis 12? It's God speaking directly to Abraham. Get out. With the father's influence gone for good, the way is finally clear. The promise, which had been waiting in the wings, now explodes onto the scene. The forgotten story of Terah ends exactly where the eternal story of faith begins. You know, a story like this really forces you to ask a personal question. Terah's journey stalled out in Haran, that comfortable place that was good enough but fell way short of the promise. And it makes you wonder, in the journey of our own lives, what's our Haran? What's the comfort zone, the good intention, the incomplete obedience that we might need to leave behind so we can fully step into what God has for us next?